The ship dropped them on the jungle moon just after sunrise. Mist still hung in the trees, and strange animal sounds echoed from far away. 100 beings stepped off the Ramphune aliens from many planets each, one sent to pass the galactic survival exam. They were given one rule: survive for 30 days with only the supplies in their backpack. No outside help, no technology, no weapons. Just their minds, their instincts, and the wild. Within minutes, everyone ran into the trees. Some looked for dry caves, others broke branches to build quick shelters. The air smelled like moss and danger. But one being stayed behind, a human boy, tall, scruffy, with a calm face, stood still. His name was Eli. While others rushed to find leaves and vines, Eli pulled a stick from the dirt and began drawing. He wasn't building a wall or a roof. He was sketching something on the ground: lines, shapes, boxes, circles, arrows. To others, it looked like nonsense. To him, it was a plan. A blue-skinned alien girl named Rinny walked by and stared at him. She tilted her head, confused. "You're wasting time, human," she said. "No shelter means no sleep." Eli just smiled and kept drawing. Rinny shook her head and left, thinking, weird creatures, humans. Hours passed, and shelters began popping up across the jungle clearing. Some looked like tents, some like giant bird nests, some just holes in the ground covered with leaves. But Eli's area was still empty. He had gathered stones in one corner, long sticks in another, and had tied thick vines between trees. Still no roof, no walls, no fire. Some aliens laughed when they walked by. Humans already failed. One of them said, "Maybe he thinks drawing wins survival tests." Said another, but Eli heard them, and he didn't care. He was building something else. By the next morning, smoke rose into the sky. Not from fire damage, but from a carefully built smoker. It was made from clay and stone, with a small fire inside and racks above it. Inside were thin strips of meat, drying slowly. Over the warm smoke, where did he get the meat? No one knew. Maybe he hunted while others slept. Maybe he traded with a jungle creature. But the smell was mouthwatering, spiced with herbs. It filled the air like a feast in the wild. Rinny returned and stared at the structure. "What is this?" she asked, stepping closer. Eli looked up from his work and answered simply, "A smoker preserves meat for days. No rot, no waste. Why didn't you build a shelter first?" She asked, still confused. "I did," he said, pointing behind her. She turned, and for the first time noticed a small hut near the tree roots, low to the ground, but covered tightly with woven vines and bark. Inside was dry and warm, with a small bench carved out of a tree trunk. Next to it was a chair with a backrest, armrests, and even a carved design on the top. A chair in the middle of a survival test. Rinny laughed out loud. "You built a chair." Eli nodded, sitting down with a satisfied sigh. "You'd be surprised how much better planning goes when your back doesn't hurt," he said. That night, rain fell heavy. Thunder rolled through the jungle, and wind tore leaves from trees. Some alien shelters fell apart. Others leaked, and a few were even swept away by the rushing water. But Eli's shelter stood firm. Inside, he sat on his chair, reading from a sheet of bark filled with drawings and notes. He was warm, dry, and focused. Rinny watched from her half-collapsed shelter across the mud. She was soaked, cold, and miserable. Through the storm, she saw the warm glow inside Eli's hut, and she wondered, what else is he building? The next day, while the others repaired their shelters, Eli was boiling tree sap in a pot. He dipped long leaves into the mix, then pressed them flat between two wooden boards. Rinny walked over, now too curious to ignore him. "What now?" she asked, arms crossed. "Paper," he said. "I'm making books." She stared at him in silence. "Books? For who?" For the next group who lands here, Eli said, they'll need to know what works, what doesn't, what plants are. Poisonous, Rinny blinked, confused. You're making a library. Eli smiled and replied, why survive when you can teach others how to thrive? The other aliens still laughed at the human, but they didn't see what was coming. They didn't know that in just a few days, they would all be lining up not for food or water, but for Eli's books, his knowledge, and his chair. Because when everyone else built shelters, the human built something more. He built systems. He built comfort. He built a future. And soon, even the council watching from above would start to whisper, who is this human? Asterisk, the sky turned dark faster than anyone expected. What started as a cool breeze turned into sharp wind slicing through the trees. Thunder cracked across the sky, and the jungle shook like something alive. Aliens ran to their shelters, some screaming, some falling. The galactic survival test had never warned about a storm like this. Rinny struggled to keep her shelter together. The vines she tied earlier were snapping like old rope. Leaves flew away, walls buckled, and rain poured down like a waterfall. Her hands were cut, her body shaking, and her eyes burned from the wind. Other alien shelters weren't doing any better. One collapsed completely, burying two frightened siblings under wet branches. Another flew into the air like a kite, crashing into trees and tearing apart. But in one small corner of the jungle camp, a single hut stood firm, not large, not fancy, just strong, quiet, dry, Eli's shelter. Inside, the human sat calmly on his wooden chair. He wasn't panicked, he wasn't rushing, he was drinking hot tea brewed over a small ember stove. His hands held a bark notebook. His eyes moved slowly across the page. Outside, chaos ruled. Inside, peace. The chair didn't wobble. The walls didn't shake. The fire didn't go out. Eli had even added small rocks around the edges of his hut to stop water from leaking in. Simple, smart, human. Outside, Rinny fell to her knees, her hands pressed into the muddy ground. Her shelter had completely fallen apart. She was drenched, trembling, and angry at herself. She looked toward the glowing light from Eli's hut. It looked so safe, so steady, so warm. Just then, the flap of Eli's shelter moved. He stepped outside. Wearing a hood made from stitched-together leaves, he walked calmly toward Rinny and handed her a flat piece of wood. It was dry and smooth, like a tray. Put your hands on this, he said, his voice calm. You're losing heat. She obeyed, too cold to speak. He knelt beside her and wrapped a large leaf cloak around her shoulders. Then, without asking, he helped her stand. Rinny expected him to take her to a fire or hand her something to eat, but instead, he walked her to the chair. She blinked. Sit, Eli said, nodding toward it. But you need it more than I do right now, he replied. She sat, and the moment her body touched the smooth surface, she felt stable. It held her weight perfectly, supported her back, and kept her legs up from the wet ground. She closed her eyes for just a moment, and it felt like she could finally breathe. Eli went back inside, returned with a hot drink in a wooden cup. Rinny took it with both hands, shaking. Why did you help me? She asked, voice soft. I would have helped anyone, Eli said, but also, chairs are meant to be shared. The storm continued all night. Some aliens slept under trees, some gave up and sat in puddles. But word slowly spread through the dark jungle. The human had a working shelter, a fire, dry food, a chair, and quiz. He let someone else use it. In the morning, the jungle looked like a war zone. Branches broken, shelters destroyed, gear scattered. The survivors limped out, weak and soaked. They found Rinny sitting in front of Eli's hut, drinking soup and looking stronger than before. And the chair was still standing, untouched by the storm. That chair became a symbol, not just of comfort, but of something bigger, of stability, of preparation, of human foresight. Eli came out again and stretched his arms, looking at the sun. He didn't brag. Didn't smile with pride. He just got back to work. He gathered wet leaves and placed them near the smoker to dry. He checked his clay pot for cracks. He made more bark paper for notes. Rennie watched him carefully now. Her attitude had changed. She no longer saw him as strange or slow. She saw him as dangerously smart. Later that day, she asked, "Why build a chair?" Of all things. Eli looked at her and shrugged, because no one else would. And then added with a small grin, "Besides, if the council's watching, let them see how a human relaxes." A council drone flew overhead, recording everything. Eli didn't hide, didn't pose. He just kept carving into wood, making something new. Rennie looked around at the broken shelters, the cold and wet aliens shivering under makeshift covers. And then, at eliscamporganize.com, and productive, she whispered. To herself, he's not surviving. He's living. Even building that night, 2 more aliens came and sat nearby. Not asking for help, just watching. Quietly, the chair had space for only one. But the idea it represented had begun to spread, because while everyone built shelters, the human had built a smoker, a chair, and something else. Something no one could yet describe, but everyone was starting to feel it. The jungle was still wild, but the human was no longer just a survivor. He was something more. He was becoming the center of something new. The third day on the jungle moon began with silence. No more shelter building noise, no more yelling or rushing around. Many alien students were still tired, cold, and hungry. Their shelters were broken, and their food supplies had spoiled in. The rain, everyone waited for the next storm, hoping it wouldn't come. But Eli the human was awake before dawn. Smoke rose softly from his cooking pit. He stirred a pot with a flat stick, grinding strange herbs into a paste, not for eating this time. He was making ink, crushed berries, tree ash, and sap. Stained his fingers dark purple near his shelter. 3 bark sheets dried on the ground, each one covered in hand-drawn sketches plants. Roots, dangerous animals, and simple traps. There were arrows, labels, and even warnings like, "Do not eat causes fever." He wasn't just writing notes for himself. He was making something bigger, a book. Rennie stood nearby, arms crossed. Watching, she had slept under a leaf roof Eli helped her build. She hadn't said much since the storm, but her eyes followed everything he did. "What are you doing now?" she asked. Eli didn't look up, recording what I've learned. He said, dipping a stick into the ink, "You're writing it all down?" "For what?" "You'll leave after 30 days, she said. Confused, he finally looked up and replied, "But someone else will land here one day." She stared at him, unsure if he was serious. Eli pointed to a drawing. "This root here, it helps with stomach pain," he said. "Yesterday, you were coughing. If that happens again, boil this with water." Rennie blinked, slowly stepping closer. She touched the bark sheet carefully, was smooth but strong. "Why do this for others?" she asked. "They laughed at you." "They did," Eli said with a calm nod. "But I'm not doing it for them." "Then who?" she asked. He smiled and said, "For the next person who's all alone and doesn't know what to do." Later that morning, a small alien boy limped into camp. His foot was swollen and red. He had stepped on a sharp seed pod with venom inside. He was crying quietly, trying to hide it. Rennie rushed to help, but Eli was already preparing something. He mixed a crushed root into warm water and dipped a cloth made of soft bark into it. He wrapped the boy's foot gently and spoke softly. "You'll feel better by night. How do you know all this?" Rennie whispered. "I don't," he answered. "I just test, observe, and write it down." That night, 6 aliens came to sit near his campfire, not to ask for help, but to listen. Eli had started reading from one of his bark books. He didn't speak like a leader or a boss. he read like a student sharing notes with friends. Some berries look sweet, but are full of acid, he said, showing a drawing. Boil first. Then test on your skin before eating. The aliens nodded, taking mental notes. One of them whispered, "Why didn't anyone teach us this before?" Another said, "Why didn't we think of doing this?" Across the camp, a silver council drone hovered silently, watching and recording inside its lens. Eli's shelter, his chair, his smoker, and his bark books came into view. The alien council. Members on the orbiting ship were confused. No human had ever done this. Most humans in survival exams used brute strength, clever traps, or charm. But this one. He was acting like a scholar, a teacher, even a builder of civilization. The drone zoomed in as Eli handed a finished bark page to Rinny. She smiled and carefully placed it into a folder made from leaves. It had a handwritten title, Basic. Survival, Volume 1. More aliens came the next day. Some brought food to share. Others offered to help him collect bark or boil ink. A quiet group started forming, not a team, but a circle, and in the center sat the human. Not standing tall, not giving orders, just sitting calmly in his chair. Teaching one alien girl with silver scales looked at the chair and asked, "Can I sit in it?" Eli smiled, stood up, and said, "Everyone should feel how good it is to sit and learn comfortably by the 5th day." Aliens from every team had visited Eli's camp at least once. Not all spoke, not all stayed, but every one of them remembered. The smell of smoked meat, the smooth chair, and the quiet human drawing on bark sheets. Some started sketching their own notes, trying to copy his methods. Others just watched, hoping to understand why this one human made things feel better. Rini now sat beside Eli almost all the time. She helped him organize the books, boil ink, and test plants one afternoon. She said something strange. "You're not like the other humans they warned us about." Eli looked at her, confused. "They said humans are dangerous, proud, and unpredictable." She explained. He chuckled softly. "Maybe I'm just the lazy kind who prefers to sit in a chair and write." She smiled and answered, "No, I think you're the kind who builds something that lasts above the jungle." The council drone sent one more message to orbit. A human had turned a survival test into a classroom, and soon the whole galaxy would know. The sun had barely risen when a scream tore through the jungle. Rinny dropped the bark paper in her hands and ran toward the sound. Others followed, climbing over roots and broken branches till they found a young alien boy lying on the ground. His skin was pale blue, and his eyes were glassy. He shook with fever. His breathing was fast and shallow. He ate something, one of the girls said, panicked. There were yellow berries in his pouch. Another added. Eli arrived moments later, eyes sharp and focused. He knelt beside the boy and checked his pulse. Then looked at the pouch, sniffed the berries, and nodded. "Poison," he said. Calm but serious. "Not strong enough to kill quickly, but it'll ruin his insides." The others stood frozen, unsure what to do. They weren't trained for this. They had only come to pass a test, not save lives. But Eli was already moving. He turned to Rini. "Boil water, fast," he said. "To drink?" She asked. "No," Eli answered. To make medicine, he ran to his hut, opened a clay jar filled with dried herbs. Inside were crushed leaves, root powder, and strips of dark smoked meat. Not ordinary meat, healing meat, preserved in the smoker with specific plants that worked like natural medicine. Rini rushed to boil water in a pot over a small flame. Eli dropped herbs into it, stirring quickly. Then he added thin slices of the smoked meat, letting it soak. The smell was sharp and earthy, not tasty, but powerful. Within minutes, the mixture was ready. Eli poured it into a cup made from bark and gently held it to the boy's lips. "Drink," he said, voice low but firm. The boy didn't respond. Rinny helped lift his head as Eli carefully dripped the hot liquid into his mouth. Little by little, the boy swallowed. Others watched in silence. They didn't know meat could heal. They didn't know a smoker could be more than a way to save. Food, they had laughed at it days ago. Now it was saving someone's life. Why the meat? One alien asked. Why not just the herbs? Eli glanced up. Some herbs lose strength in boiling water, he explained. But if you smoke them into meat first, it holds longer, works better. Rinny blinked in surprise. You planned this from the beginning. Eli gave a small nod. I've been testing every plant I find. Drying, boiling, smoking, writing it all down. He pointed to his latest bark page, where symbols marked which plants caused vomiting. Dizziness, fever or healing, he had mapped. The jungle better than the exam monitors themselves. An hour passed, then 2. The boy's shaking slowed. His breathing became easier. He opened his eyes, weak, but alive. Cheers broke out across the camp. Aliens hugged. Some cried quietly. They had never seen someone saved like this. Not with machines, but with knowledge, smoke, and patience. Word spread fast. Aliens from other groups came to Eli's camp to ask questions. What plants are safe? How do you make the smoker? Can you teach us to make the soup? For the first time, the alien teams didn't feel like competitors. They felt like students around a teacher, and the teacher didn't wear a crown or speak loudly. He sat in a wooden chair, stained with ink, and explained everything with slow hands and careful drawings. That night, 3 more aliens brought him gift-dried mushrooms, fresh berries, carved bowls, not as payment, but as thanks. They placed them near his smoker with quiet bows of respect. Rinny sat beside the fire, watching it all happen. Her voice was soft, almost proud. You saved him, Eli. He shook his head slowly. No, he said. The knowledge saved him. I just passed it along. Up above, the council drone captured every moment. In orbit, the exam observers were silent. They had never seen a test go like this. No fights, no betrayals, no fear-based survival, just one human doing something no rule had asked for, creating value. This changes everything. One council member whispered. Another nodded. He's not surviving the jungle, she said. He's changing it, back on the ground, the young alien boy rested near the fire, sipping broth, his eyes filled with quiet wonder as he looked at Eli. Not like a hero, not like a warrior, but like someone who knew what to do when it mattered. And the smoker, once laughed at, now stood proudly. Near the hut, its wood darkened by flames, its smell soaked deep into the jungle air. It had dried meat, saved food, created medicine, changed lives. Because while others tried to survive, the human built something more. And in doing so, he showed them all what survival really meant. Not just staying alive, but helping others stay alive too. It was the 10th day of the survival exam. The jungle had calmed down. But the air was still heavy with heat and questions. Around Eli's camp, things had changed. The alien students were no longer just visitors. They had started staying tense. And Leon too circled his shelter like a quiet village. Aliens worked together, taking turns gathering wood, watching the smoker, and copying his bark paper books. They weren't told to do it. They simply chose to. The council had been watching from above since day 1. At first, they ignored the human, thinking his slow methods were foolish, but now they couldn't look away. The drone feeds showed more than survival. They showed learning, healing, and peace, things no one had ever seen in this challenge before. Inside the orbiting ship, 5 alien council members sat at a long table. Their faces were unreadable. Their eyes fixed on the live screens, they saw aliens from different worlds sitting side by side, passing tools, reading bark scrolls, and laughing together. And in the center of it, Eli, carving into wood, sipping soup, and teaching quietly. This wasn't part of the test. One counselor said, frowning, "He's not leading a team, he's creating a system. Should we interfere?" Another asked, but before anyone answered, a red light blinked on the console. A drone had landed on the surface the council had chosen to visit, on the ground. A small silver drone touched down in the middle of the camp. It shimmered with light and unfolded into a floating screen. A deep voice echoed from it, calm, but full of authority. "Galactic Council, transmission all candidates, please gather." Aliens dropped their tools and came running. They sat in rows, quiet, nervous. Wondering what was happening, Eli stood calmly. Wiping his hands with a cloth before stepping forward, Riney stood beside him, her hand gripping a scroll tightly. The screen flickered, then showed 5 counselors staring down. Their robes were bright, their faces serious. "You were brought here to survive," the lead counselor said. "Alone or with your species. Using only what you could find." Heads nodded slowly. No one spoke. "But this?" The counselor continued, zooming in on the camp. "This is something else." One of the counselors raised a finger toward the screen. "You've built a smoker," she said, voice sharp. "A structure not for shelter, but for processing." "For strategy," another added. "You created a chair, not for rest." A third said, "But for comfort and command." Then the oldest one leaned forward and said, "And now, you're writing books on bark sheets." His voice was quiet, almost accusing. "Who gave you permission to do that?" The air grew still. Aliens looked at Eli, wondering how he would answer. He stepped forward and spoke clearly. "No one gave me permission," he said. "I didn't need it." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Even Rini looked surprised, but Eli kept going. "When we landed, we were told to survive. No tools, no weapons, no help. So I built what I needed." He held up one of his bark books. "This isn't just for me," he said. "This is for the next one who lands here alone. Scared, confused. This will help them live better." The counselors exchanged glances. They hadn't expected defiance, but they also hadn't expected logic this strong. Rini stepped forward next, lifting her scroll. "I'm not human," she said. "I'm from Nalari, and my team was proud and stubborn. We mocked the human when he built a chair, a smoker, and a book. But when the storm came, our shelters fell. When my friend was poisoned." His knowledge saved her. She turned toward the crowd. "We're not following him because he's stronger. We're following him because he cares." Soft murmurs spread through the group. Some aliens wiped their eyes. Others nodded slowly. The truth hung in the air like smoke from Eli's fire. One of the counselors spoke again. "This survival test is ancient. It hasn't changed in centuries. It was designed to push the body, not build the mind." Another asked, "Did this human break the test or evolve it?" No one had an answer, not even Eli. The council screen flickered again, then displayed a new message. "Final decision. Test requirements. Completed. New evaluation. Human participant of standard." Eli didn't cheer, didn't smile. He just nodded once and said, "Good," then turned back to his smoker to check the meat. As if nothing had changed, but everything had, because now, aliens who once saw humans as dangerous, wild, or chaotic were learning that humanity had something even more powerful. The ability to teach, to organize, to improve, not just survive, but uplift others. As the council drone floated away, Rini looked at Eli and whispered, "What happens now?" He looked around at the camp, the growing circle of students, the chairs being built, the books being copied, and said, "We keep building, for the next 2 days." The jungle was quieter than ever. There were no storms, no fights, no cries for help, but the silence was not peaceful. It was heavy, full of questions. The alien students still worked, still read Eli's bark books, still built things near his camp. but everyone whispered the same thought again and again. Will he be disqualified? The galactic survival exam had very old rules. Each student had to survive using only their own knowledge and strength. Helping others wasn't forbidden, but leading, organizing, teaching. That was something new, something the council had never planned for. Even Eli felt it in the air. Every time he lit the smoker, every time he handed a book to a young alien, he could feel invisible eyes watching him, judging him at night. The stars above blinked like silent witnesses, and from orbit, the council debated. Inside the council ship, the 5 members met again, this time without the cameras, without the screens, just silence, data, and one growing question. Did Eli fail the test or change it forever? He ignored tradition, one counselor said. He made tools, built comfort, even created a learning system. He turned a solo test into a community camp, another added. He may have interfered with other species' results, but the oldest member stood slowly, his voice calm and deep. Or, he said, he gave the test more meaning than it ever had. He survived and made others survive better. He passed and helped others pass. The vote was split. 3 against him, 2 in his favor. And so the final decision would not come from orbit. It would come from the ground on the 15th day. Another drone came down, this one gold, not silver. Everyone in the jungle knew what it meant. Final review. The drone hovered above the camp and projected a message. Candidate Eli of Earth, please step forward. Eli stood up from his chair, wiping clay from his hands. He had been helping a group of kids build a clay oven near the fire. He looked at Rinny, who nodded with quiet strength. He stepped toward the drone. The screen flashed. Did you break the test? Eli didn't flinch. He looked straight into the lens and said, No, I followed the rules. I didn't ask anyone to follow me. They chose to. The drone asked again. Did you build tools not allowed? Eli answered, No. I built everything from what I found here: sticks, stones, bark, sap, fire, time, no machines, no off-world items, no cheats. Then came the final question. Why did you teach others? Eli paused this time. His answer came slowly. When I arrived, I didn't know what would happen. I expected pain, hunger, fear. I got those, yes. But then I thought, if I'm going to survive, why not survive well? And if I learn something useful, why keep it only for myself? Knowledge means nothing if it dies with you. The drone fell silent. So did the jungle. Aliens from dozens of worlds watched with held breath. The council was not speaking now. They were listening. The drone buzzed gently and then announced, Your survival is no longer in question. You have proven self-reliance, creativity, and adaptation. However, your methods challenge the meaning of the test. So we present a new outcome never used before. Eli raised one eyebrow. Rinny leaned in with interest. The drone said, You are not disqualified. You are not simply passed. You are selected. Gasps rang out. Eli blinked. Selected? He asked quietly. The drone continued. For a new role, you will stay, train others, and help redesign the survival exam for future generations. Your camp will be the first official interspecies survival academy. Eli chuckled once. So, I turned homework into a school. Rinny burst out laughing. Others followed. Some clapped, others cheered, a few even cried. The drone hovered over the camp and scanned everything: the smoker, the books, the chair, the tiny clay oven. Each item was now part of history. Rinny stepped beside Eli and whispered, You weren't chosen to pass. Eli, you were chosen to lead. He looked at her and smiled. Then let's get to work. He said. That night, the stars felt closer. The jungle felt safer, and the fire crackled louder than ever. Aliens who once came here to pass a test now stayed to learn something deeper, something human, something lasting. Because Eli had proved what no rulebook could explain, that survival is not just staying alive, it's teaching others how to live. And while everyone built shelters, he had built a future. 30 days had passed, the survival exam was over, but no one wanted to leave. Ships arrived to collect the alien students, but most of them stayed where they were, sitting on logs, reading bark books, stirring pots over low fires. The jungle, Moon once a testing ground, was now a place of learning. What Eli had started alone was now something far bigger. A camp had grown into a village. The village had turned into a school, and now? The council had named it the first Library Moon. Eli stood outside his shelter, watching the sky turn orange with the setting sun. His smoker still let out gentle trails of warm smoke. Books dried on racks nearby, their pages filled with plant drawings, trap diagrams, fire-making steps, and hand-sketched maps. Behind him, the once empty clearing now held structures made by many hands. Small huts built by the Nalari dome tents made by the Uranth, and simple log benches carved by a dozen species. A new chair sat beside his, the exact same design. Rinny had built it herself, using what Eli taught her. Students came from orbit every 3 days now, not to be tested, but to be taught. They landed in small shuttles, wide-eyed and quiet, expecting danger. But finding a man in a handmade chair, offering warm soup and a scroll. Rinny had become his assistant. She handled the groups, explained the layout, introduced the jungle like it was a tour, but every new arrival always asked the same thing: where is the human? And she always smiled and pointed to the man by the fire. He's right where he's always been. One afternoon, a small girl from a desert planet approached Eli with a paper in her hands. It was a drawing, messy but full of color. A tiny version of a smoker. Next to it, a stick figure sitting in a chair. She looked up and asked, shyly, "Can I build this when I go home?" Eli looked at the drawing, then at her. He nodded. "Not only can you," he said, "you should." He picked up a smooth bark cover and wrote something on it. Volume 2. Sharing what you've learned. Then he handed it to her. Her eyes lit up like stars. She ran back to her group, holding the book high. Rinny watched the moment. Wiping her hands on her tunic, she whispered, "You've changed her life." Eli replied, "She changed someone else's next." That evening, the council ship visited again, but this time there were no tests. No speeches, no warnings, only a plaque made of polished crystal. They handed it to Eli in front of all the students. It read, "To the first human who taught the galaxy how to thrive, let knowledge be the shelter we all share." Eli didn't cry, but he stood silent for a long time. Then he placed the plaque at the entrance of the new library shelter. It was the largest building in the camp, filled with bark books, scrolls, tools, and memories. Years passed. More teachers came, more books were added. Some students returned as instructors. Others started new camps on other moons, but every one of them remembered the first lesson. A chair, a smoker, a book, and the man who believed that surviving wasn't enough. That teaching was stronger than fighting. That making someone comfortable was more powerful than making someone afraid. One night, as fireflies danced through the leaves and the jungle whispered in the dark, Rinny sat beside Eli at the fire. They didn't speak for a while. Just watched the flames crackle and rise. She turned to him and asked, "Do you miss Earth?" Eli stared into the fire and smiled. "Sometimes," he said, "but this place, it feels more human than home ever did." She leaned back in her chair. "I'm glad you built that chair first," she whispered. "Why?" he asked. "Because," she said, "everything else came from it." The stars above seemed closer now, not distant, not cold, but full of students, ships, and stories. And down on the jungle moon, beneath those stars, one human sat in a chair beside his fire, still teaching, still writing, still helping others build more than just shelters. Because while everyone else tried to pass the test, he changed the test. And while they built walls to protect themselves, he built a place where knowledge became protection for everyone. The Library Moon was no longer just a location. It had become a symbol of hope, of unity, of what happens when a human doesn't just survive, but helps others thrive too.